Hello everyone, a very warm welcome to you. My name is Nick and welcome to episode 15 of Spectrum Talk. Almost forgot about how many episodes we've done then, where, as you know, the same preamble, we always look at anything to do with the ZX Spectrum, might be memories, gaming, the Spectrum itself, history, or gaming characters, or whatever. If you've got any ideas for things we can talk about, or things you'd like to have discussed, things that mean something to yourself, then please put it below. I'll make a note of it and we might have it as a subject in future ones. Now, someone did suggest before we look at clones, and we did that last week. Very briefly, we looked at the official clones, the Timex computers, which mainly come out in the States, Argentina, and a few other places. And I gave you a big long list as well as the unofficial clones. And there were quite a few of these computers. The list went on and on and on, and I'm sure there's a few that I missed out as well. Most of these computers did tend to be from Russia, and the reason why people produced these computers is because it was a wild west of gaming, start of an industrial revolution, so to speak. The Spectrum really was at the forefront. It really took people's hearts. It sold loads and loads of copies, so if someone could produce an identical computer or a new copy of that computer that could play the old software, in times of money short for people, they'd always go for a cheaper alternative that can play it. So that's why people tended to do that. Amongst these clones, maybe one of the best-selling one out of the lot is a computer called the SAM COUPE. Now, it's arguable whether this is an actual Spectrum clone or not really, because you had to do a few things to make it compatible with Spectrum games and Spectrum Basic, but I'm sure people that bought that might have seen it as a cheaper alternative to the ZX Spectrum, and that's why I include it, and we'll talk about it a little bit now. The SAM COUPE, as it was pronounced, was a British computer made in 1989 by the Miles Gordon Technology Company. That's based in Swansea, in Wales, in United Kingdom there. It was at a time where you could make these clones without getting sued by anyone, because they were quite basic computers when you look at it really. Looking for a piece of the home computing ZX Spectrum action, the makers marketed this as the logical upgrade from the ZX Spectrum. Now, whether that was or not, it was arguable, because Sinclair Research was still making computers then, and of course they were going on to the 128Ks as well. So was it a logical upgrade? I'm not quite so sure. It had been in 1984, 1985, they might have been able to say that, but you know, Spectrum was nearing the end of its run then. Amstrad had already bought Sinclair Research, and they were sort of like stuck on the 128K, so they was a bit late moving in on the market really. So although not marketed as a clone as such, that is what it perhaps become. It had a screen mode which could match the ZX Spectrum and also could emulate previous software. The operating system was something called SAM Basic, so it didn't copy Sinclair Basic as such. So it sort of went in its own way, and it looked pretty much different enough from the ZX Spectrum, although, as I say, can't stop historically looking at it as a perhaps clone. And the system did alright in its own right, selling 12,000 units or even over. So in terms of all the other clones out there, this is probably one of the most successful, the SAM COUPE. Now, did you own one of these computers? Was it good enough in its own right? I do know there were games actually designed specifically for this computer, although not a great many compared to the ZX Spectrum, which is over 25,000. The computer had a processor, a CPU called a Z80B, which was clocked at 6 MHz, which was quicker than the ZX Spectrum. The same, it could be connected to a cassette recorder to save and load data, or you could have a disk drive there internally, 3.5, and that could be installed within the case. So that was quite flash. What was better than the ZX Spectrum, which this machine had, is 6 channels of 8-octave sound. Yeah, that's 6 channels via a Philips sound generator chip. Called an SAA1099, I believe. So that was a big step forward as well. If they'd released this at the same time as the Spectrum, it might have been a serious competitor. The machine also had a series of expansion slots for peripherals, most importantly a mouse. I never had a mouse for my ZX Spectrum. I'm not sure if there was too many available, but this had that included, because you're thinking about at a time 1989, the computer was really competing with the PC development that all had mice, and the 16-bit world in the gaming consoles, Commodore Amiga, etc. Now this was the rub, which one could argue it wasn't a ZX Spectrum clone at all, because it took a little bit of effort to do. It could only emulate 48K ZX Spectrum, so it couldn't do the 128 due to key and mapping. But in order to emulate the ZX Spectrum, you had to load a Spectrum ROM and then switch the correct mode. Now, in order to have a Spectrum ROM, you would have had to buy a Spectrum computer, because you couldn't buy the ROM separately, not from anyone that I knew of. So if you're going to do that anyway, why not just use an original Spectrum? So, bit arguably that if this is a clone or not, so it could do it, but you needed the ROM, i.e. the Spectrum anyway. As mentioned, even with that, it couldn't copy the 128K software at all because of certain memory mapping. So it could only go so far within its own limitations. So who was behind this SAM COUPE then, and why didn't they get sued? Because there was nothing to do with Sinclair Research. They had no contact with Amstrad. That's quite a small company which not too much is known. Now the SAM COUPE name has been owned by 4 different companies, although some of them owned by the same people. A bit suspicious when I write down the notes here. But as I told you, it was launched in 1989, but unfortunately missed the deadline for Christmas sales due to, I don't know, some marketing or some production. So because of that, vast quantities of stock ended up unsold still in warehouses. So the company was on a bit of a bad foot with losses in terms of cash flow. The main sales of computers always come around the Christmas type period, where parents were looking to see what they could buy for their kids or indeed for themselves. And as I say, you weren't going to buy it then, the sales are going to be a lot less in January and February. So after that rush was over, of course, as I mentioned before, to sell any more of these SAM Coupes, as well as competing against the 128Ks, they were up against the 16-bit era computers and also the PCs, and it was a time where all 8-bit computers were struggling to a certain degree, even the real ZX Spectrums. Also, what was another nail in the coffin for Miles Gordon Technology is the original computers shipped out had problems with the ROMs, and they had to replace about 8,000 of them, and you know, this also caused an additional loss to the company's balance sheet. So the SAM COUPE was launched in 1989 by the company, and just 1 year later, so barely 1 year after production, although it was a solid computer, it failed to do enough sales. It failed to grip the public's imagination, who always wanted newer and newer technology. It had missed the boat essentially, and the company went into receivership. So they had huge losses, and now very oddly, just immediately after the company went into receivership, the original founders, Alan Miles and Bruce Gordon, bought back all the company's assets and formed SAM Computers Limited. I don't know if this is a way of writing off the losses or something, or just starting from a clean slate, but they set up the company SAM Computers Limited, so a name that ties in actually with the SAM COUPE, and that survived until 1992. They were then bought out by West Coast Computers. Very little is known about them. They revamped the machine under the name SAM Elite 1992, where 512K was the standard for the system, and there was a printer connector also established on there as a part of the design specs. This company were based in Gloucester, and this ownership only lasted until 1994. So 3 companies, relatively short time spans, actually own the name. I don't think any of them could make an amazing amount of money. I think West Coast Computers sold mainly the old stock that was left over and then dwindled down to nothing. There might be some additional information I haven't come across, but that seems to be the story. And most recently, in 2017, a company called Andrews Limited registered the SAM COUPE name as a UK trademark, but to my knowledge, I don't think there's anything else they've done with it quite at this stage. So there's many clones available, or was around at that time for the ZX Spectrum, had different production runs, and as we said, although the SAM COUPE could be argued it wasn't directly a ZX Spectrum clone, if you mucked about with it much, you could actually make it perform tasks that the ZX Spectrum would have done, load up the basic program from an existing 48K ROM. Now, did you own a SAM COUPE, or do you still own one, or do you own one of the other clones we haven't actually come to, or maybe mentioned briefly last week? If you did, let me know, and maybe we'll try and cover those if I can find enough information there. But I think overall, the most famous one was the SAM COUPE, which sold over 12,000 units. Wasn't enough to keep the original company afloat because they missed that Christmas deadline. One would have thought if they released the computer 3 or 4 years before and everything weren't going good, it may be a name that we're talking about today, and people channels just donated to them, but they could never ever get up there with the 8-bit era, the ZX Spectrum, the Commodore 64 and the Amstrad CPC, and of course then you're looking at all the other things, Amiga, Atari ST, PCs and so forth. So thank you for watching another episode of Spectrum Talk. As I say, if you've got anything you'd like us to discuss, or me discuss, I say I'm the only one here, but we can discuss it in the forum, that's what I pretty much mean, the comment section below, then let me know and I'll write that down and we might have a bit of a chat. So, thanks for watching again, and till next time, take great care of yourself and a very fond goodbye. Goodbye.